All right. My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Bobby Rowett. It's July 25th, 2023. We're at Portland Wine Storage in Portland. Bobby, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
First question is why wine?
Wine really captured all the different parts of my life that I wanted to sort of explore through the course of my whole life. And so, essentially, when I was going to college, I studied philosophy. And what that generally means is that you're interested in ideas and thoughts and not really on like specific jobs or how you're going to bring in a paycheck. So what I realized is that afterwards, I started working in a wine shop just to get a job. And I had bartended and worked in restaurants since I was 15 years old. And I realized, I can become a sommelier. There's all these different avenues that I can get involved in the wine industry. But really in the back of my mind, what I always wanted to do was just to travel the world. And I didn't grow up with money to be able to do that. So I eventually realized that the wine industry could get me where I wanted to go and get me around the world. So. And along that path, I had so many conversations with winemakers and family members of people in different places around the world, and just saw what their perspective is. And I realized really that wine is this like all-inclusive culture. It's not just a job. It's not just a hobby. It's not just something to have at a party or to have with food or whatever. You know, it's all these things, and it's also a way to, I think, explore a lot of interesting intellectual pursuits, things that I've been interested in for my whole life. Phenomenology is really like a philosophy that's stuck with me even since my college days, and it's really about experiencing consciousness and reality through what's happening in the moment. It's based on direct experience versus like this Cartesian approach where it's materialist and you have objects that exist and you just sort of interact with them. I never saw wine as something that just exists and, like people try it and it's gonna taste the same way to everyone, for example. It tastes different to everyone, and it depends on what your mood is that day, or what other smells are in the room or in the air. Just who you're with, all of these things. Are you at a party or what's going on around you? That's all a part of like when you drink that wine, the experience you have. And so that experience itself, I think, is what I really appreciate in life in general. And wine really like captures that perfectly. So once I realized that, I was like, this is something that I could explore for my whole life. and it's a job that I could do in all these different ways, and I'll never get bored because I'm just that person that gets bored with my jobs. And I need something new to be happening, to continue to be interested in, a new challenge or something, a new way to think about it. And wine's always covered all of those bases. So.
Well, let's back up for a second and talk about life before wine. So tell us about where you were born and raised, and as you were getting ready to head off to school, how that decision came about.
Originally I was born in a very small town of a couple thousand people in Idaho, called Mountain Home, Idaho. And I eventually ended up moving to the big city of Boise, Idaho, when I was in elementary school. And wine or alcohol in general. I mean, we would drink alcohol when we go up to our family cabin or something like that, or at Christmas, whatever. But it was not really a part of what I was exposed to until I got, as I said, into the restaurant business. And I really started work as soon as I legally could at 15. And I started bussing tables. And then I slowly but surely got, just realized I had a real passion for food and wine. Not wine yet, but food and and food culture. And then there's this interesting law in Idaho where you can be a bartender when you're 18. And so I started working with blending cocktails, and I wasn't allowed to drink them. Sometimes I could like try a little sip out of a straw to see what we were making or whatever if we were doing a training exercise. And it just, from the very beginning, I just enjoyed, it's probably how a chef relates to food, but I immediately enjoyed just seeing this blend of all these ingredients come together and try to create something special and giving it to people and seeing people have a good time with it. So that's really, I guess, in the early days how I got interested in wine, and then I sort of forgot about all that while I was in college, and I was just studying and really interested in intellectual pursuits. And then, then as I said, when I left college, I started working at the wine shop, and that was the Boise Co-op wine shop, which was brand newly opened, and it was the first large freestanding wine shop in Idaho. And we had a selection of Burgundy specifically there that had its own room, and it was its own very specific climate control. And I think they spent 3/4 of the budget of the whole store on Burgundy. And it was like completely out of control for the market there. I decided, okay, this is like the most dorky part of the store. I really want to learn all about this stuff. And so it became my job specifically to go and organize the Burgundy selection, build displays, and I ended up putting up the wine maps that many of us know up on the walls and organizing the selection along with the maps along the whole wall. And through that process, everything got sorted into its own area, and I got to learn, well, what's the difference between Côte Rôtie and Côte de Beaune, and then each individual vineyard beyond that. And I just loved it. It was the first time I had a job where every single day at work I was just fascinated by what I was doing. And my boss and coworkers were just like loved that I was so passionate about it also. There's a lot of good momentum there. And at the same time, I was doing some sommelier training as well to continue to learn more about the rest of the world of wine beyond Burgundy. Then I got a second job as a bar manager and a sommelier at a restaurant in town. And I did both of those jobs for a couple of years, and then one day we had a winemaker visiting from Mata Gourgagnier out of Provence in southern France. And we had gone out to dinner, and we were just chatting, and they told me that there was this thing available called the Harvest Internship. And I was like, wow, I'll work my butt off if you let me come and do that for you. And I was like, this is my chance to travel right now. So I worked it out and ended up going over there. And then at that point, I wasn't convinced that I wanted to make wine yet. I was still figuring out what's my place in the wine industry. But I did all the typical things. I learned how to shovel grape stems and clean drains, and I learned not to breathe out of the fermenters while they're active. And all the intro lessons that people learn in their first season. And I also just got to live in this place that was in the countryside, and there were 5 generations of families that were, 3 of them were buried in the property, and it was just like this amazing experience. It was a place that I had never seen before. So I decided that I wanted to learn a little bit more about winemaking, but I didn't speak French. So then I took a job in South Australia where I could learn about lab work and all the technical sides of winemaking. And I went and worked at Hewitson Winery in the Barossa Valley there. And I stayed through harvest, and then I stayed, since I had sales experience, I stayed and helped them with some sales work for about 6 months after that to kind of get a little more, get a perspective on how that worked in another country, I guess, and how importing worked. And so really, I decided at that point, I might want to be a winemaker. I might want to start my own winery, but but I want to see what all these jobs in the industry are first, and really make sure. So that was the last place that I traveled out of the country. I felt like I had achieved my goal there, and I came back to Boise and started working at the wine shop again, and I got my job back as my sommelier position. And the Snake River Valley was a newly formed AVA around Boise. And there were a couple of new producers there that were doing really good work that had moved from Washington out of the Walla Walla area. So they were coming with a lot of experience and doing things really by the book. So I got a job first as an intern, and that was at Cinder Winery. And worked there along with my couple of other jobs for a few years until they offered me a full-time job as an enologist. And so then I was finally able to fully commit to the wine industry and really start focusing only on winery work.
Pick it back up there in a second. Obviously, you mentioned kind of wanting to see all of the jobs and all of the places. So tell me about retail wine and what you learned at both a wine shop and a sommelier front of house side. Tell me about building wine lists. Tell me about selling wine to people directly. What did you learn, and what did you enjoy about it?
Yeah, well, I mean, really most days at the wine shop involve people coming in and sort of wandering around with big eyes like, I want something really great right now, but I have absolutely no idea where to start, right? And so, yeah, I would just walk up to people and ask them what I could help them with, and hopefully they would be able to give me some information, and I could help them find some wine. And then they'd be, there's a group of wine collectors who would come in also, and then they would tell me stories, and it was the other way around. They'd be like, well, you don't know about this yet, I know, but let me tell you about this. And so, I got to learn about all the esoteric ways to make German wine, for example, or Italian wine, all these very deep roads in the wine industry from those guys. And that was a lot of fun. And then, we also developed a community around that where we would have wine dinners together with those folks, and then I got access to drinking wine out of their cellars that had been aged, and that was a whole nother level of wine that I didn't have access to at the time. And became like kind of like a really good, not really a mentorship, but just an exposure to what wine collecting is all about. And yeah, so I mean, that was really, and then there was also the opportunity to give classes at the wine shop, and that's something that I really enjoyed, and it was another opportunity for me to learn, and it's an opportunity to share with people who are really interested in what was going on, and so yeah, I enjoyed doing that, and then at the restaurant. It was more like it was my domain. I get to pick the wines that are available for people when they come in for dinner. And I really I took a lot of pride in making sure that there were good wines that were accessible for people. I've always felt like it was really important for anyone who really wants to. Maybe you even have to save up money for a week to go out to dinner or something like that. But if you really want a bottle of wine, it shouldn't need to cost you a couple $100s. I always try to help people find great wines that can even be $20 to $50 a bottle, so they can have wines that can provide the experience of really having a moment and not just taste like a lot of other things. Mm-hmm. So. That's really what I was focused on in the sommelier role.
So as you were educating yourself and being educated in these wines, what did you find yourself sort of drawn to, both as a drinker of wine and as a builder of these lists? What were the kinds of wines that excited you the most?
Yeah, I mean, well, initially it was the wines that I'm talking about. It was trying to find the real values in the wine world, whether it was an underrepresented region. Or some grapes like Blaufränkisch, Zweigelt, Gruner at the time, still relatively undiscovered, or Champagne, specifically right out of the gate was to me something that was like singularly unique and amazing. And now we're talking about the other side of the spectrum in terms of price too, right? And but there were bottles of wine, bottles of champagne that were available for $35 at the time. Pierre Gimone, for example. I remember it was 96 Pierre Peters Blanc de Blanc was really, I had a magnum of that I had bought for the restaurant, and then ended up opening with my family for a family event, and that was really like the wine that blew my mind the most up to that point, to where I saw, wow, I have no idea how this person could make something like this. And I really want to find out how that works. It was just very inspiring. And so that's really, and the restaurant was, I like talking, I'm a very social person, and it was a great outlet for that also. So I really enjoyed just going around talking to people at their tables, having conversations about their evening and their wine in general. And so, yeah, at that point, there was a good balance in terms of like, I was working in all these different areas at once, but not really sustainable for very long to be working 3 jobs. And so, yeah, so then I did work for Cinder full time, and then about that time I also had one of the importers that was selling to both the restaurant and the wine shop offered me a sales position, and he specifically sold the Terry Thies portfolio, the whole thing, and that was a lot of the best grower champagnes specifically that were coming into the state at the time. And so then I basically worked with him so that I would be able to try all those wines. And he loved to share them with me and teach me about all of them. So it was really great. And I worked with him for a couple of years and tried through a couple vintages of all of these producers. And it was at that time that I was thinking, okay, I do want to make my own wine. I was realizing like I want to be working for myself. I have too many ideas, and at this point in time, I think like making something happen for another producer isn't really where I want to go anymore. I want to like make my own ideas happen, and that was all about champagne. And Snake River Valley is very, very similar to Walla Walla. It's geographically part of the same zone through the Missoula floods. It was carved out through the Missoula floods, and the weather is hot in the summer, and so it's just not the most ideal climate to make sparkling wine in the Northwest. And so I started looking at the Willamette Valley, and I thought, okay, I'm going to find a couple producers in the north part of the Willamette Valley that are making wines that I really appreciate, wines that show restraint and precision and what people call terroir, just expression of their place in the soil and weather specifically. And one of those wines that I found just while I was trying things was Metello. And that was made by Marcus Goodfellow. It's now Goodfellow Family Cellars. But I called Marcus and came out to visit him, and really intending on wanting to bring his wines into Idaho and sell them. And so, yeah, I came to visit with him, and we spent the afternoon trying through his cellar and saw eye to eye on a lot of things. And I thought, okay, there's really is something here that I need to explore a little more. So we kept in touch, and I would go and I talked to several other winemakers on that trip, and I asked people, why don't you make sparkling wine? I know that there's Argyle, and they do a fantastic job and have for years, but that's really all I see coming out of the area. So why don't you make sparkling wine? You have Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And people typically would say, well, I'm a Pinot Noir maker. That's what I do. And so that's that. And they're very serious and dedicated to that. So what I was seeing was that there wasn't a lack of ability to make this happen. It was just that people were already very committed to their own craft, and that hadn't come up yet. So really, that was when I realized, okay, this is where I need to be moving eventually, and this is going to be the next step for me, come into the Willamette Valley. So a couple of years later, I had kept in touch with Marcus, and he had moved to a larger facility and needed help, and timing worked out well. He brought me on as an assistant winemaker, and that was in 2012.
Before we get to Oregon, tell me about your first harvest experience. You mentioned Provence, you mentioned kind of the history of the place, and obviously a place you'd never been. What about the work itself? What about the work of winemaking made you want to keep doing it?
Yeah, so that's another very important piece to me is the actual physical work. And part of what I was starting to realize there was that the work I felt like it was offering me more than just a way to get a paycheck, which is really that's really ideal, I think, for most people. You get something else for your job. And I think the work, what I was realizing was it was pushing me in unexpected ways. So sort of like, when you go skiing for the first time of the season, you have all these sore muscles you didn't know you had or whatever. But it pushed me and just caused me to continue to grow in unexpected ways. And I thought that was really exciting. In Provence specifically, there was this, like I said, this history there, and my family's very close, and I've always been a very family-oriented person, so that was really meaningful to me as well. And yeah, I mean, it was just something that would push me out of my comfort zone just enough to where I'd have to rise to the occasion over and over, and whether that was something that was mentally challenging, like just the boredom of doing some very repetitive task for 5 hours, and finding a way to push through that and try to get something out of it, or just being physically tired, whether it's sleep deprivation during harvest, or just doing some physical task that was giving me sore muscles, and continuing to have enthusiasm through all of that. What I really like about harvest work specifically, or bottling work, I guess a lot of these manual labor parts of the job is that I think it keeps your feet on the ground. When you're cleaning out a drain from olive harvest, it's like, the grossest kind of plumbing work you can be doing almost. And I think it keeps you grounded while you're doing this amazing job at the same time, and you have so much that's more glamorous. So I really like that, and I've really, there's a real, to me, it's very spiritually satisfying, this type of work, and whether that's just providing a connection to the earth through this farming practice, and then working with all the elements to create something that we can all enjoy at the end of the day, or just having to deal with the differences between one harvest to the next and what challenges are getting thrown my way. It's really like, to me, this alchemical process that the grapes go through in this literal traditional way, but that also happens to me throughout the year too. So, I'm going through this process that's different every single year too, and I come out a different person every year because of it, which I think is absolutely amazing.
And you mentioned the next work was enologist, both in Australia and then in Idaho. Obviously, a different look from the kind of the cellar grunt work to the chemistry in the lab. So, tell me about learning that part of it, and what that kind of added to your skill set and to your experience.
Yeah, right. So the lab work was a really fun piece for me because I was a science nerd as a child. I was just always like, doing science experiments, asking for chemistry sets, biology, going hunting for snakes or whatever in the desert, all these things. And I actually, when I got my bachelor's degree, I was the only person that year to get a bachelor's of science degree in philosophy instead of a bachelor's of arts. And it was just a matter of like, I'm taking what classes are fun and interesting to me, even if they don't necessarily go together traditionally. So, but then when I got into the winery, this all started working together. So I started learning how to do the lab work, which I just thought was fun. And whether that's learning first how yeast cells divide and how to properly build up a strong yeast culture to inoculate fermentations, or then choosing a strain of malolactic bacteria that you want to use, seeing what all these different things do from barrel to barrel and what you like and don't like and how they blend together. And also seeing sort of like what are my taste buds telling me, what are my instincts telling me about what's going on with the wine, and then what do I get in the lab and how does that match up? And eventually, learning to really trust that I think my most useful instrument is my taste, and having the confidence to just know how to make decisions on the fly without having to always send everything in to get it double checked. And that's when I started developing some of those skills, and then later on. Using the lab to do cell counts when you're doing a secondary fermentation to make sparkling wine, and making sure that you've got this thing started properly. It's going to be okay in the bottle, and it's going to come out right on the other end. Because at that point, there's no going back. So doing those cell counts is very fun, and it's also it's immediately like gratifying to know, okay, things are going to be good right now. Yeah.
Reassuring.
It's reassuring. Yes, exactly. But I would say that I definitely really appreciate the lab as a tool to verify things, and certainly it helps with things like picking decisions. It keeps the wines on the rails, if you want to call it that. But for me, it's really is limited to be a way to verify my instincts, and it's not a way that I don't like to have the lab guide my decision making when I'm putting the wines together.
So we talked a little bit earlier about sort of your impressions of Oregon as you were looking for a place to make sparkling. You had kind of explored around and you'd found wines and winemakers you appreciated, but not necessarily a lot of sparkling. So I'm curious, before coming here, what were your impressions of the wines being made here, and what did you sort of think about as you were coming here that you would bring to the table?
Yeah. Well, really, there's a wonderful variety of wines already being made here in that, 12 years ago. A lot of it, though, was based on all of these nuanced differences. It was kind of like Burgundy is how I was thinking about it. I've always thought Oregon is unique and special and stands on its own. It doesn't need to be like Burgundy or like any other region because it's special here. But I saw as much variety as I was seeing in the Côte de Beaune, for example. What I wanted to bring to the table was a new style of winemaking. Really, I thought, okay, there's an opportunity here to really create something new that should be widespread in this market. It's just those were the earlier generations were paving the way to be able to do that later by figuring out where's the place to plant Pinot Noir, where do we plant Chardonnay, what clones are we going to plant, and what are the differences between the Ribbon Ridge and Van Duzer Corridor or McMinnville AVA or all these places, right? So I got to walk into this wealth of information and really decided, okay, what I like to contribute here is this has all been done wonderfully, and so now I can take all these inputs and run them through the sparkling winemaking process in a traditional way, by the book, and see what comes out. So that's what I was doing for the first couple of years after I started Mellen Meyer, specifically was doing things as by the book, by the Champagne method book, as possible, and then just trying to look at all the different sources I was using and how they were similar or different from each other. And that's really that's a long-term process. That's a long-term research project. Because the fact is it takes minimum 2, but more commonly like 4 to 6 years to create these bottles of wine. So we're really still in the early stages of that exploration. And fortunately, it's something that's caught I think that it's become like an intellectual fascination for tons and tons of winemakers in the valley at this point. And last year I think I was saying that there were over 30 people producing sparkling wine. I think that number is definitely higher this year. So it's really wonderful.
So before starting Mellen Meyer, you were working with Marcus as assistant winemaker. So tell me about that role and about working there while also starting to plan what will become your own thing.
Yeah. Well, and so, I was always talking with him about really what I needed to learn first was how's Oregon? Okay, Oregon is different. Things need to, the wines being produced here need to be produced differently than other regions that I've been in. And so first it's like covering those basics, like how do we, what's the difference between when we're harvesting, the fermentation kinetics, how to manage all the tannins in different parts of the fermentation, so on and so forth. People are using different methods and techniques in the cellar that I had not seen before, so it's sort of getting all the tools together so that I'll have access to them. And also getting to know the vineyards, as I said, and what are going to be some of the inherent qualities of the fruit that comes from this or this or this place. And since those are the raw materials that you're starting with, so you get your raw materials and your tools and kind of figure out how everything works together. And we would have almost daily conversations about all those variables. And the first thing that struck me about being in the Oregon wine industry was, and this is something I think most people recognize here, is how wonderfully collaborative and open and encouraging people are with each other. Everyone's willing and excited to share information and help people who are newer or who are trying something different. And and when I started producing sparkling wine, things were going well. It was really a wonderful feeling when I had very experienced winemakers asking me for my opinion about how to produce something that they hadn't done before, and then in turn they were giving me advice about how to produce Pinot Noir in a more traditional way. So this collaborative effort, I think, is just really wonderful for the industry here in general.
So with the decision to focus on sparkling, tell me about sort of starting your brand, coming up with a name, coming up with starting to source vineyards and decide how to start the research project.
Yeah. So it really was, the first question was, can I do this? Can I make sparkling wine that works and tastes good and turns out? And I had a conversation with some people who told me, you're trying to build a Ferrari before you know how to build a go-kart. Like, you don't do that. And they also said, I know you're going to do it anyway, but I just want to let you know that's my opinion. And I said, okay, we understand each other. And it's true, but I mean, my thinking was, this is what I came here to do, so I'm just going to have to go ahead and do it. And luckily, I had been married the year before, and my wife was very supportive and excited about what I was working on. And so the Mellen Meyer name came from Mellen, which is my middle name, and Meyer, which is my wife's maiden name. And since I was originally inspired by the family nature of the wine business, I definitely wanted that to be a part of the name and the history of our winery.
What about choosing the grapes with which to work? Obviously, you had started to familiarize yourself. You had started to sample the various AVAs. Didn't have a lot of experience with sparkling to test. So, what were you sort of looking for when you were coming up with grapes to source?
Yeah, so I mean, I had an idea from trying so many champagnes and having a lot of points of reference, like what would I like the wine to taste like, and so I knew I was going to limit it to traditional champagne varieties, so Pinot Noir, clones of Pinot Noir, and Chardonnay. And another really important, another piece of the puzzle of wines that I have always liked are things that show a lot of soil, minerality, and are brighter in tone. And so I was thinking, okay, well, I need things that are on the higher elevation side of things so that I can get as much of that brightness and tension in the wines as possible. And also just the fact that wines from Ribbon Ridge in the beginning and Van Duzer were just my favorite things that I'd had for years and years once I had gotten here. Mm-hmm. So I knew that there was something in those AVAs that resonated with me personally. So those were the first sites that I sought out to work with. And then I had an opportunity to get some fruit from the Dundee Hills as well, which I thought would make for a good blending component because some of the other sites can be a bit austere, and so it's a big part of the tradition in Champagne is blending, and all non-vintage champagnes are blended, and some of the best wines that are made there are blended from decades of different lots. Mm-hmm. So, but really, yeah, I mean, I was really looking primarily to Ribbon Ridge AVA, and I had a connection there and access to fruit from Whistling Ridge North Block. And in 2013, while I was still the assistant at Goodfellow Family Cellars, Marcus said, "Okay, yeah, let's go ahead and make some wine. We'll get a ton of fruit in." And that year was incredibly rainy, and which worked out perfectly for what I wanted, luckily. And so the first wine I made was a Saignée method rosé. So I fermented for Pinot Noir, for still Pinot Noir. And then after I let the fruit soak for about 5 or 6 days, and then I pulled some of the juice off to try to concentrate the skins and get some of the excess water out. So while most wineries were taking advantage of that opportunity to make rosé that year, I just decided to make sparkling rosé. And I had it in this little oil can that was like about this big. And I think it was, I don't know, it was enough to make about 30 cases of wine. I went through the process very painstakingly by myself in the back corner of the lab, and then waited for 3 years to see what happened. And the wine turned out to be more expressive in the ways that I had hoped than I ever would have imagined it would be. So, okay, we're really on the right track here. This is going in the direction that I had in mind. So yes is the answer. We can do this, and let's really dive in now at this point.
So tell me about that. Obviously, wine itself, it requires a lot of patience, but sparkling wine even more so. So tell me about the kind of keeping up the sort of optimism and the work as you're waiting for it to come out the other side. Were you, when you tasted the first time or when you tasted the finished product, were you prepared if it didn't work out? Were you prepared to change your mind and do something else?
Well, no. I mean, luckily I didn't have to go through that battle with myself. That's not to say that, of course, there are problems that come up along the way, but they weren't as drastic as like I have a finished product and it tastes terrible and I can't sell it. And so there were definitely, it was really, I think it helped too that my perspective after the first couple of vintages was really like, okay, I'm still learning about how this works in this area, and so is everyone else. So I don't expect these wines to be perfect right off the bat. I want them to be delicious and taste good, and I want people to be excited to drink them. But as a producer, your standards are, first, sometimes they're just not even realistic or achievable, right? And I think that that's a common thing for people who make arts in general. And so, you know, I think it's a matter of faith. I mean, it's like, it really is saying, okay, this isn't perfect this time around, but I'll remember it doesn't need to be, and what can I learn? How can I, it's like, how can I try to tweak this or that thing to get this a little bit closer to what my ideal bottle is going to look like? And that challenge is really a big driving force for me. And it's something that keeps you intellectually engaged in what you're doing. And as I've said before, I need that in order to sort of stick with whatever I'm working on.
You mentioned obviously blending is a big part of what you do. So tell me about, with the first wine, the first couple of years of wine, tell me about starting to kind of work with the blending and work with what the finished product was going to be. How confident were you in the decisions you were making at that point, and what were you sort of learning through that process?
Yeah, so I mean, from the second year, 2014, I started holding back reserve wine and keeping it in a cellar style tank. So every year I would be adding some fraction back to that tank and taking some amount out and blending it into the non-vintage wine. And so I've always produced a non-vintage brut, and that is a big part of the tradition in Champagne as well. So that was a deliberate choice, and this is a style that's worked well for them. We do have a bit of a different situation here in that the reason that was happening in Champagne was for so many years were because there's so many years where it was just like too cold to get things ripe enough to make good wine with, or there'd be some drastic weather event, or they needed the ability to blend vintages together to fill out every year. And here that's not the case. I mean, there are challenging years and there are easier years, but you can really make a single vintage wine every year if you want. I also like the tradition and the ability to, like, why not make a non-vintage wine? There's nothing inherently worse about that. It's actually, like, blended wines are wonderful. So you have an opportunity with sparkling wine specifically to be able to do that, and people don't ask questions. They're like, oh, this is a non-vintage Pinot Noir? What happened? Or whatever. And then watching this tank of this Solera method reserve wine evolve over years and years and years was incredibly interesting. And it's still something that I have and have maintained now for 10 years. And then, learning what is Pinot Noir, how is Pinot Noir, the expression of Pinot Noir different here than it is in Champagne, and how is Chardonnay different, and Pinot Meunier, how's that different? These are all used for very specific blending purposes in Champagne. And in Oregon, I've come to really believe that works differently. They still blend well together, of course, but Pinot Meunier, for example, is used to add a little bit of depth and breadth to wines in years that are a little too austere and maybe too skeletal, and the Chardonnay is too skeletal. And we just have more flavor and more breadth in the wines here out of the gate. And so I see Pinot Meunier not as much as a blending component here, but as a standalone opportunity to make a standalone wine, and whether that's sparkling or still, or rosé, sparkling or still. Yeah, there's the you know, I wanted to start traditionally, and then let's see where this takes us in our own region, and try to really focus on what's this wine like in Oregon. We're not trying to imitate anyone else. We learn, you know, I learned the method to produce this from their history, but the wines do and should taste different here. So let's embrace that and see where that takes us.
Tell me about growing the brand, and as you were having success, as you were tasting wines that you were happy with, did you have sort of a size in mind or an end goal? Was there a end goal that you were looking to sort of strive toward?
Yeah, I mean, I've always thought that you know, between 3,000 and 5,000 cases is a good size for a winery that is really oriented towards smaller production, like very hands-on winemaking, and less mechanized winemaking. And that's what I enjoy doing, and that yields the results that I'm looking for in my wines and wines of other friends and colleagues in the industry. So I mean, I think that that's a good size and scale. And then it's a matter of ultimately, you know, having some plantings in some new areas that are not explored yet, because they're not where we would be planting for still wine, but for sparkling wine, maybe more ideal than what we already have. So there's a lot to look ahead in the future there, and I'm very, very excited to see those things start to go in, both for myself, but also since so many people are excited about this now, and people who have the resources to really do deep research and plant wherever the heck they want in whatever volume they want, it's going to be happening more and more, and I think it's going to be incredibly exciting. It'll be a big expansion in our industry for sure.
Talk about selling wine a little bit. Obviously, once you have wine, you got to do something with it. So tell me about finding a market. Obviously, it seems kind of funny to look at it now, to finding a sparkling wine market. But when you were starting, you still had to kind of find that market. Tell me about finding the places for your wine, and how you sort of chose to approach sales.
Yeah, so I mean, the first probably 5 or 6 years that after I had started my winery and I had committed to Mellen Meyer, and I was no longer working at Goodfellow Family Cellars, I was working. I worked for a couple of different companies as a wholesale representative. So, and part of my job at Goodfellow was also sales work. So I was developing contacts in the area, and really originally I was just intending on just selling direct myself through those contacts. And early on, I mean, my first year, I was bringing these wines out. People were like, "Oh, this is interesting. Like sparkling wine. I don't know if we can sell that. I mean, we'll try it. Oh, this is really good, but I'm not sure. Like, I'll take 6 bottles. We'll see if they move." And the restaurants, the sommeliers were a little bit more receptive, because you know, I've always continued as I did when I was a sommelier. I've always tried to have a wine available that's really something that people can afford to buy, that's accessible, and that's what the non-vintage brewed is about. It's not compromising quality, but bringing something to a larger audience. And sommeliers love that, because they're like, "Oh, I can pour this by the glass. It doesn't need to be on the bottle list, and therefore move a lot slower." And so that worked well for that wine. I also, for the first 8 years of production, I was making a sparkling Riesling in the traditional German Sekt style. And that was something that sommeliers absolutely loved, because Riesling was really like becoming a darling grape for them, and it was very dry, very food friendly, and something that we didn't. I mean, there were only, I think, 2 or 3 bottles that we're even getting from Germany at the time, so it was a really unique product that had a lot of history, and so that helped me get a lot of inroads with that crowd as well, and Local grocers were really like New Seasons Market specifically was really supportive, and since they expanded very quickly about the same time that I was expanding, that helped a lot too. So that over the years just sort of worked itself out. But and I was making volumes of wine commensurate with what I thought I'd be able to be selling at the time. So luckily that worked out.
Obviously, you had a lot of experience selling wine, as you mentioned before, and during the same time. How was it different selling your own wine?
It was, this is something that, like, when you're selling wholesale wine for other people, it's kind of like you have to study and learn the bullet points and try to sell people on the idea and really, like, hope to not get too many questions that you can't answer or whatever. And then when it's your product, it's really more like, I found that I just like to pour the wine and let people try it and let them come to me with questions and have more of a dialogue. And it's much, I appreciate that the dynamic because it's not as much of a sales interaction as it is just a conversation and what they think they can do with the product. So I love that change for sure.
What about dealing with sort of you have this product you've created that is obviously very personal to you and very exciting. Dealing with people who don't appreciate it the way you do, or don't want to sell it, or don't think it's good.
Yeah.
How did it feel when you're taking the wine on the market and dealing with any kind of rejection?
Yeah, it's always hard. I think, and I've had people tell me like, hey, these are great, but I just don't know what I can do with them. I don't have, my buyers aren't looking for this, and that's hard because you're like, oh, am I spending all this time making something that isn't really going to go anywhere? But again, I think that's where you just have to have faith in what you're doing, and sometimes it's just blind. It's not based on anything. It's just like, I really believe in this, and that's got to be enough right now. And it's a matter of being stubborn and bullheaded and maybe just kind of like ignorant to the reality of the situation and waiting it out. So, that's really how I got through all those moments. Yeah.
Curious about 2020. We've talked to a lot of producers about 2020, and obviously most of them were making red still wine, so a little bit different. So
yeah.
I'm curious about your Harvest 2020 experience. Were you affected by Harvest of 2020 in any way? Did it change your plans in any way?
It got my butt moving really fast. You harvest fruit for sparkling wine earlier at lower bricks anyway, so the timing really worked out to where I was picking during the first week where there was pressure coming in to pick. And I had already planned and made those arrangements, and the fruit was not picked early. It was picked at the right time. It just timing-wise worked out. Additionally, when you make sparkling wine, you're pressing it. It's just like making white wine. You press it right away, and it doesn't spend any time in contact with the grape skins or anything on the surface of the grape skins. So I was able to dodge a couple of obstacles there and really get the juice out. And it worked out okay for me, fortunately. Yeah. But I also didn't know all year, I was like, I don't know what's if there's anything in the grape, or this was new. I was looking up research from Australia where they've had a lot of weather problems for years and years and years, and seeing, okay, what am I going to do if this comes up, and definitely relying on the lab to verify that there weren't things that were going to be coming up. So yeah, that was a less stressful year for me luckily than it was for most people. Yeah.
So what point did you feel like you sort of had not arrived, but that Mellen Meyer was going to work, and that it was time to kind of put all your effort into that?
It was as soon as I felt like I was not able to, having two jobs was preventing me from putting enough time into Mellen Meyer. So it was really just like a requirement almost. And like, I'm finding myself, I'm not able to communicate as well with my wine club members, or I'm not able to, just dropping the ball from time to time. I forgot this appointment that I had with this wine shop, or stuff like that started happening for just a couple of months. And I'm like, okay, I think it's time to face the reality that have to let go of the security blanket of having a steady stream of income and just go ahead and jump into this thing. And know that really that was the only way that the winery was going to be successful ultimately, was if I did that.
You talked earlier about sort of the single vineyard sparkling as becoming sort of the main thing, one of the main things you're doing. Tell me about honing in on vineyards and building relationships to find the grapes you wanted to make the wines you're making now.
Yeah. So, as I said from the beginning, I was working with Whistling Ridge North Block specifically, which is about a mile up the road north of the main vineyard site, and it's in an area that's totally surrounded by trees. Parts of it are completely shaded all afternoon even, and so historically it was used to make rosé most commonly. And so it was a natural fit for sparkling wine in terms of when it was getting ripe. I had developed a relationship with the vineyard owners and managers when I was assistant at Goodfellow Family Cellars. So, and that, as I've said, is it's just been my very favorite vineyard since I've been in Oregon, and even before. I just love the expression from that site. So, I couldn't be happier to be working with that. And then I was also working with Johan Vineyard early on because an important part of my winemaking process is native fermentations, and so I'm not inoculating for primary fermentation. And I haven't done that at all. And so finding vineyards that are biodynamic or organically farmed, or at least naturally farmed, not necessarily certified, but vineyards that aren't applying things that really suppress the natural microbial populations on the fruit. So being a biodynamic farm at Johan, these things are coming in full of life. And I really appreciate the tradition and the stewardship and the real attention to detail and effort that goes into biodynamic farming. And so, I'm very happy to have access to work with that fruit. And it also, when the fermentations start really fast, because they come in with this very healthy active yeast population, you don't have to worry about a lot of the spoilage problems that can happen early on if you're doing a natural fermentation and waiting for things to start up. So you get to almost skip that danger zone in the beginning, which is awesome. And then the Riesling site was another site that I had an earlier connection with, it was also another site that was just typically very, very late harvest. Even sometimes the wines, when they were made as still wines, were just so bright in acidity that we'd have to wait 4 or 5 years to release them. And so easy fit for sparkling wine. And the vineyard growers and the vineyard owners have always been, I've had a great relationship with them just personally, and also they're very excited to see sparkling wine being made. I think that it's, I'm always very make an effort to share the wine with them, give them an allocation of it, and I think it's a good feeling, and it's fun for them to have bubbles being made from their site as well as still wines. So it's always been a very positive reciprocal relationship there with the growers.
So we talked a little bit about the growth of the brand so far, and a little bit about the future as well. Tell me about looking ahead for Mellen Meyer. What are you looking ahead to? Are there other projects, growth, new things you want to try, or what is kind of on the horizon for you?
Yeah, really, I've talked a lot about, and my path for sales so far has been through wholesale, and eventually got into sending wines to New York and East Coast and Northern California, and try to branch out of the Northwest a little bit. But I really now am dedicating time to building more direct sales and having more of a relationship with my direct customers. And having time to have events with people and not just be focused on making the wine, and that's kind of all I've had time for. I really just love sharing my wine with people directly, and I love having people make appointments and visit me and talk about the wines to the real like wine fans and wine collectors. Since that has been a big part of my life, it's just naturally a fun thing for me to be doing, and so I'm really pushing to have a tasting room available that people can come and we can have that experience together. Yeah. And as I've said, ultimately, having a vineyard planted with specifically selected clones and varieties that can really be a very long-term contribution to the wine industry in Oregon, and even after I'm no longer producing wine.
And what about sort of outside of wine? Anything else you're looking ahead to on a more personal level?
Well, I mean, I am in the throes, right in the middle of. I have a 4-year-old son and I have a 13-year-old son, and so right now, I mean, I've really been. My role as a father is extremely important to me. I'd say it's more important to me than the winery, honestly. And so I'm trying to make sure that I have the time to enjoy all these moments that I'm having with my children right now and the family in general. And so in the summer, we're sort of, slowing things down a bit deliberately and making sure that we take advantage of the time to go do things together as a family. I continue to really like to read and sort of be a philosophy dork, and that's something I can do whenever there's time. So between that and spending time with friends and family, that's really gives. I feel like I have a very full life.
Talked a little earlier about your initial impressions of Oregon, both before coming here and then once you were here. In what ways have you seen Oregon sort of grow and change since you've been here, and what does the industry look like to you now in 2023 compared to where it was when you got here?
The sparkling wine industry has just exploded in the last few years, and so that's a major change, and we've also seen a lot of generational change with winemakers too. And I'm sure you've had conversations with many of those people. And so, but I don't feel like the nature of the experience of Oregon wine has fundamentally changed in any way, which I think is a wonderful thing. Mm-hmm. I think it was started with all the right intentions and the right amount of effort and just the culture itself. I feel like is very much the same as it was when I first started coming and visiting. And I think that's wonderful. That's something that I would hope would not change even as the industry grows and grows and grows. Mm-hmm. The ability of people to start really from scratch and create a brand and have a small brand and have that be something that people are excited to sort of explore and find when they come visit the Oregon wine areas, even in the south or the north or whatever. Mm-hmm. Finding those hidden gems is really fun for wine collectors. And the large producers continuing to be very supportive of that, and everyone working together, whether we're just having fun events together or whatever it is. I mean, that's, I think, what makes the Oregon winery unique and wine industry unique and interesting and just distinctive in the world even, I feel like it's a place for anyone to enjoy who's interested.
What comes next for the Oregon wine industry then?
I don't know. I mean, we're seeing a lot of change right now in terms of, I think, a lot of investment in the Oregon wine industry from out of state. And so we'll see where that leads. And I would anticipate there'll be some consolidation of some wineries, and I'm also seeing people that started their wineries when I was starting 10 years ago get to the point where they're no longer startups, but they're really having, like I said, they're having tasting rooms, and they're having, they're becoming a central part of the industry as well. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them are bringing new varieties into the mix, and working with, different styles of production. And so I think that there's going to continue to be a little more diversification in terms of the style of wine that we're seeing here. Really, there's just so much fantastic Pinot Noir and Chardonnay that's been made here for a very long time. Newer folks are trying to create and bring something new to the table. So that's going to continue. And I'm happy to be a part of that as well.
You mentioned your initial answer to why wine, talk about kind of the culture of wine being something that attracted to you. So this many years into your kind of life with wine, how would you define sort of the culture of wine and what appeals about it to you?
The culture of wine, well, I mean, yeah, the culture of wine is, I think it brings together people who I like to have conversations with. There's a lot of people who are interesting and have their own ideas about the world and are very creative and artistic and also just very passionate and unafraid to sort of speak their mind. And I really appreciate all of that. I think that that's a big part of the culture of the Oregon wine industry here. I still appreciate, I guess I've spent the last 10 years working on building the winery, and I would like to, and I'm seeing opportunities start to develop now where I'll be able to maybe take some summer trips and go visit other parts of the wine world and, drink some other wines that aren't just from Oregon again. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Last question for you. If someone were to ask you for sort of words of wisdom or advice on entering the Oregon wine industry, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very welcoming place. I think if you show up willing to ask a lot of questions and learn and be willing to do whatever type of work needs to be done in exchange for that wealth of information, that opportunities will unfold and a path will present itself. You just have to be willing to really just put in whatever work people need you to put in and be open-minded and enthusiastic about that whole process.
All right. So all the questions that I have for you. Anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything that we didn't cover here today that you'd like to cover?
Well, I guess there is one thing, it's so another part of how I spend my time, I guess that I hadn't mentioned, is that for 20 years I've been working with refugee populations that come into the United States. I've learned a lot about what their opportunities are when they get to our country and the obstacles that they have. And I would really like to see when we talk about people wanting to get into the wine industry, I think that there is a lot of opportunity to bring in other parts of the global population in Oregon into the wine industry. It's just not something that they generally have the resources to buy bottles of wine when they arrive. But they're always extremely hardworking and willing to learn new things and excited to learn new things and just excited and hungry for opportunity. And so I think if we can come up with some creative ways to bring those opportunities to these parts of our population, I think it would be really wonderful for everyone involved. And that's something that is always kind of I'm always milling around and trying to think of creative ways to come up with programs or whatever to make that happen. So.
Excellent. I'm glad you're able to share that. That's excellent work, noble work, and admirable. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today, sharing your time with us in this cool, funky space in Portland.
Yeah.
We'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
All right. Thank you so much.